All right. Well, thanks all for showing up. I feel like this is a strong turnout. When I looked at the agenda and I saw I was speaking on the second day after a Thursday night in Vegas, I was like, might be a little thin on the ground in terms of the audience. But yeah, thank you for all being here. Hopefully everyone's like really caffeinated. I often think that if I was doing this presentation 12 hours ago, I think you guys would be really wowed, because the more you guys are drinking, the more interesting I am. So hopefully this won't be too dry. I'll try and kind of keep it moving, keep it anecdotal. But I'm going to be talking about onboarding for retention and revenue. And some little slide up there. There you go. Onboarding for retention and revenue. So, as I was so kindly introduced, I'm Dominic. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at ZoomInfo. I'll take like 30 seconds just to tell you what the hell we do. We aren't Zoom, strangely enough. My parents still are like, oh, is that the video company? I'm like, no. So at ZoomInfo, we basically believe that data is the foundation of all of your go-to-market efforts as a company. The insights, the engagement, the intelligence, and that's probably more acutely prescient right now, just given that we are going through this like phase of digital transformation. The goal is to help you or help our customers identify the right buyer at the right time, serve up the right message, interact with the right person, and through like the right means. So that's essentially kind of in a nutshell what we strive to go and do for the customer base. To give a little bit of context around the CX org, just because I've listened to some of the conversations and the presentations this week, and it's so fascinating to just hear the journey, right? And hear how everyone's at this different stage of maturity and what you're kind of up against, right? And the challenges you're facing. There was a fantastic roundtable yesterday I was listening to, and it was just hearkening back to sort of remembering what it was like when I was at a 150-person company and trying to get this thing off the ground and wearing 1,000 hats and trying to make it work, right? And justify why I should hire 3 more people, you know, and why that's important. So interesting, everyone has a different stage. At ZoomInfo, we're slightly further along in terms of size. So we're probably about 3,500 folks. We have about 500 folks in our customer experience organization, customer experience. I'm probably dating myself now. Back when I started, we used to call it client service or like relationship management, and then it's like CX or CS or success. So whatever sexy kind of acronym you want to use, it's kind of what it is. So about 500 folks. We've got about 4 business units in that. We've got a customer success team, a customer support team, a kind of a customer delivery team, which is like pro services, and an integrations and implementation team, and in addition, an onboarding and a training team. So it's a fairly kind of built out model. So what I'm going to talk about, some of it may be really applicable, some of it you may say, I don't have 500 people, what are you talking about? But hopefully what we're talking about in concept and in theory will still be valuable, because I think all of these concepts are kind of things we should be thinking about as practitioners and leaders in CX. So with all that said, I'll kick into it. So there we go. I'm going to press this giant green button. Cool, that's me, sorry. So with the help of this handy-dandy agenda, I'm going to talk about 1, what is customer onboarding and what it isn't. 2, what customer onboarding should be. 3, how you create that interlocking relationship between each of the components within a holistic onboarding motion. 4 is how you can take a data-driven approach to each phase of the onboarding that's going to help you identify gaps in your onboarding motion and set the foundation for a better sense of outcome attribution. Right? I'll get to this a little bit later, that idea of like outcome attribution. 5, dispelling that notion that onboarding is a singular event. It is not. And then 6, drawing the line to retention and revenue. So you're trying to tie these elements together to draw a more solid line from the onboarding experience to your retention and your NDR, NRR, and your outcome. Cool? So hopefully everyone's still with me, not bored yet. All right, so as promised, I'm going to talk about what customer onboarding should be, and actually I think one of the easiest ways to talk about it is what it isn't, right? So it is not just provisioning and implementation. You know, this notion of you buy it on a Monday, you provision it on a Tuesday, customer logs in on a Wednesday, and voila, they are onboarded, or they are sort of in the funnel. That's not the right way to think about it. That's one extreme. The other extreme is this kind of squiggly line situation happening. I did this in Notepad. Which is, it's not an information overload, right? We're all very excited about our products, right? I could ask any leader or practitioner in the room and they could probably talk to me for like 20 minutes about all the amazing things their product does. Onboarding isn't the time to just overwhelm your customer with this deluge of information, right? You want to be really targeted, and you want to really think carefully about how you move through that process. And again, the sophistication and the comprehensiveness of your onboarding motion is a spectrum, right? There are going to, and where you fall on that spectrum for your business is predicated by things like, you know, how big is your team? What is your customer base? What does your product look like? What is the industry you're serving, right? All of these things are going to determine where you live on that spectrum of detail versus sophistication, right? If you're Salesforce and you're doing a massive deployment, then it's probably a fairly sophisticated process, right? If you're something that's like a plugin, it's pretty lean, time to value, get them up and running in a week, get them learning the most important things. So again, there's no right answer with a capital R here. It's just what's right for your business. So stress that. So I do feel confident in the assertion that it's not either of the extremes that I've just kind of listed out, right? You don't want to be quick with it. You don't want to have it be a deluge of information. So focusing on like, what are the valuable use cases? What are those precious pieces of information they're giving you that they're talking about where they're saying, this is what matters to us? So with all that said, there is a slide here. Right, so what it should be. So all of these are interlocking, and they're not singular events, they're mutually exclusive. So this is kind of what it should, this isn't what it should be from like a tactical activity perspective. There's not like a spreadsheet with bullets and sort of to-dos. This is just how you could think about shaping and constructing that framework as you go through this vital stage of the customer journey. So first up, it's the first customer experience of value. So it's really honestly their first interaction with your brand. First interaction with your people, first interaction with your processes, you know, and hopefully we're all building something that is positive and value-based, and ultimately that first experience is going to set the tone for everything that happens thereafter, right? Next up, it's a time to understand your customer. So there is a wealth of knowledge that exists in the minds of your solutions engineer, your AE, maybe even your SDR, right? There's probably a ton of stuff in your Salesforce, your CRM environment. The key thing here is that exists, you want to garner as much of that as possible, but it's also a time where you can learn directly from the customer. So evaluate the customer from like a firmographic perspective, right? What's the industry they play in? How many people do they have, right? Like how big is their space? What's surrounding them? Try and understand them as well from a technographic perspective. What does their tech stack look like? Where does your solution fit in the rest of that tech stack? And what are the integration points? Like, what is your system a fulcrum? Is your system sort of more of a best-in-class point solution? But how do you fit in that broader workflow? Understanding this from your customer is also going to be key. This is the moment where you can do that. And then honestly, understand like, why did they start talking to you in the first place, right? I think that's one of the things that like we always forget is like, why did they pick up that SDR call? Or why did they go to the website and fill in your form? Right, like, what's that rationale? So that the more you can get back to that, the quicker you can understand what value is. Third one is the time to set clear expectations. I think that you hear a lot of phrases out there today, like being customer-centric, or being customer-first. That's another good one. And sometimes, and sometimes I think that that gets kind of conflated. Right, people conflate the idea of being customer-centric and customer-first with basically always just saying yes to your customer. And spoiler alert, those are not the same thing, right? So it's that notion of this is a period where if I can really advocate in this period to set like those clear expectations and taking a consultative approach to this stage of the journey, I'm going to be able to better set them up for success, better set up our teams for success. So things like help them define like what the benchmarks are, right? A lot of our customers will come to us and actually say like, so I've never bought a tool like yours before, like what should I be measuring? Or, you know, what are some of your other customers doing, right? You've got customers like us, what do they measure, right? You know, one of our competitors uses you, like what are some of the stuff that they have configured? Now, obviously, some of it you don't share all of it, but the notion of like, there are best practices, right? For businesses like yours, at your size and scale in this industry, we have found these things work, right? So being consultative. And I think that at the end of the day, for me, disappointment, by definition, in my head, is just the delta between what you think you're gonna get versus what you actually get, if what you actually get is less than what you thought you were gonna get. That is it. So in this stage, I can mitigate that delta by aligning what they think they're gonna get versus what they get, right? And that's not always managing expectation down. Sometimes it's managing it up, but sometimes it's like saying, actually, we can do all this stuff. But the key here is you wanna make sure that you're setting them up for success, and by doing that, it's mitigating that delta between the expectation versus the reality. The next one, time to align with the customer's goals. So this is kind of a super obvious one. A lot of times in my career, I mean, I think I was listening to a talk here yesterday where folks were talking about when I was a CSM and doing that job. And I think about that today, and I still have PTSD about some of those customer calls. But the notion is that I think that aligning, because I've walked into a situation as a CSM or as even like a leader of a team, and I'll walk in and I'm like, I know a customer like this, I've seen this, I know what they're gonna want, let me tell you what's gonna happen, this is how it's all gonna play out. And sometimes I'm right, and more often than not, I'm absolutely not right. And so the key there is make sure that you are aligning with the customer, right? You might say they're gonna need this workflow, but maybe not. Maybe sort of that pre-sale process, maybe something was missed, maybe something was misinterpreted, right? So always re-qualify, right? And I think that what you can do is not assume, right? There are going to be different personas. There might be, the AE might have spoken to one MPOC in one department. They outline this use case. The person you're talking to does not have that same use case desire. So don't assume it's the same, right? So just make sure you're like confirming and reconfirming. I'm a big fan, honestly, of like over communication in this phase. Like this is the moment to over communicate. I think Oscar Wilde has, as a British person, you might correct me here, but I think it was Oscar Wilde, he said the expression that less is only more if your more is rubbish. So if your more is good, more is more. And this is how I think about onboarding, and this is how I think about cake. Yes. So then finally, it's a time to empower the customer so they can take ownership and see value, right? So it's amazing the number of times I've seen customers come in and they buy a tool and they think that this thing is going to show up with a team of experts and it's going to implement itself and it's going to be perfectly administered with amazingly clean data and absolutely no user idiocy. That is 100% a fantasy. Never has happened that way in my entire career, 20 years doing this. Deployment has never gone that way. So this is a moment to create some accountability, right? One of the biggest things I tell customers is, you are buying this tool. This is your tool. Like the value you get is largely based upon how much you want to put in, right? Like we built this thing, I support this thing. I'm not the business, right? I'm not you. So this is your tool, your program. Let's get you empowered. Let's have you feeling accountable for your own success. I'm sure a number of you have found you deploy a tool and then the customer's like, it's just not working for me. And you're like, well, did you attend a training? Did you do any of the best practices? Did you read the, this QRG guide I put together for you? Did you visit any of our online resources, right? Did you show up to the bloody kickoff? Right, all these things, it's about making them feel accountable for their own success. So that's a huge piece of this. And ultimately, things are gonna work out better when the customer feels empowered with their own tool. All right, so, because I'm probably running over, because I don't think I've ever finished anything on time. What you've got here is kind of like those components, right? So this is a fairly archetypal onboarding motion, handoff, kickoff, yeah. Fairly archetypal onboarding motion, it's associated sort of sub-components, right? There's gonna be different permutations on what you're seeing on the screen, depending on your business, but the themes and the flows should be pretty similar. Now, before I dive in, I'm just gonna shift over to a quick analogy, and I will make this quick, which I like to use for context. So when I think about this stage of the customer journey, I think a lot of it about and being analogous to a traveler stay at a hotel, right? Hotels spend a lot of money on their lobby, surprise, surprise, because it's your first experience, right? It's visual, it's visceral, right? The Bellagio smells a certain way. I'm not sure if you noticed this, but I was walking around some of the hotels last night, and Bellagio, literally there's like a perfumed smell here. For those of us, and again, I'm dating myself, for those of us that ever went to an Abercrombie & Fitch store, we all know what that store smells like, don't we? Right? So, at the end of the day, they spend the money because it's that first experience, right? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What's the floor like? What's the lighting like? Right? They put a lot of research into that. The other place they put a lot of experience in is in terms of that first interaction, the front desk staff, right? You'll notice that every single hotel here, staff are dressed a certain way. They have a certain look to them. They address you with similar language, right? That's all branding. That's all deliberate. That's all research. If you ever go to Disney World, it's the same thing. Right? They call you the same thing. They use the same terminology. That's branding, because it's the first experience, and they want it to be amazing. Because at the end of the day, we all know and can remember what a good hotel check-in experience feels like, right? You know what that feels like. You get there, the line's not that long, they're well-staffed, it's organized, doesn't feel like the airport, right? You get to the check-in, the person's nice, they're polite, they know who you are, they've got your reservation, they have your saved room preferences, and before you know it, you've got your key card, you're up in your room, your bag's down, and you feel good. And conversely, we all know what a really poor hotel experience looks like, check-in experience, right? I'm sure we can remember that, right? You get there, there's a massive line, it's not organized, the front desk staff doesn't know what you're doing, they can't find their reservation, they're like, I'm sorry, I'm new. They don't have your saved stuff, so you end up being on a floor that's like, you know, in a room that's right next to the fire alarm, probably by the the emergency exit, like on the first floor, looking in the dumpster, right? Like, we know that. We know that feeling. And the funny thing is that it doesn't matter after that about anything else in your room. The fancy soaps, the big television, the mattress, the bathroom, the lighting. It doesn't matter at that point because you're pissed off. Because you walked your room, you're like, this was bloody awful. And you're not paying attention to all that other stuff that they put money into. Because that first moment of truth, they blew it. So from that moment on, they're playing catch up with you. They're trying to make it better for you. Right? And there's not a lot of opportunities to make it better in a one-night stay. So that, again, I think about onboarding as the hotel check-in. It is your first moment of truth. So I always have this expression that's like, you don't have to be perfect all the time. Your customer journey from start to renewal doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't, because it can't be, because no one is perfect. You just have to know when you need to be perfect. When you need to show up, right? And when you need to show up big. Cool. So I'm not going to spend time going through every one of these, but the handoff, I'll get back to this. Maintaining momentum from the purchase, right? So time kills all deals, any other kind of cool sales expression you fancy, right? So maintain momentum, the customer's excited, they've seen the demo, it's shown them how it's going to do all their stuff, plus iron their clothes and do their laundry, right? We get to inherit that fantasy land as the post-sales team. But, so they're excited about the purchase, you've got momentum, that like maybe the exec buyer is still involved in the deal, they haven't like disappeared into the ether yet. So you want to get a hold of them. So maintaining momentum, speed. The other one is ensuring internal alignment of goals, challenge priorities, right? So this is an internal thing. Like, do you have a process in place that says before you walk into that kickoff and there's that first moment of truth, is there a process you have in place where you actually align on like how you're going to get this thing done? Have you spoken to the sales engineer, right? Do you know what's been promised? Do you know what the customer really wants to talk about, right? If you're kind of in an org that's more capacity constrained, it's like high volume and throughput, is there a queue, right? Is training backed up for a week? Do you have an implementation specialist who can actually work on this, right? Have you done your due diligence so that you can show up the right way? Next one is kickoff, right? So a really strong handoff sets you up for a really strong kickoff because with all of those things, you're ready to go, right? So that first moment of truth, it's key. Ensuring alignment of sort of the goals and the priorities, right? So that sense of like, what is important to the customer, right? Again, depending on who you spoke to in the sales process, making sure that you're aiming and you're pointing your resources at the right thing. Because the truth is, you're probably not going to set up every single bloody thing in the first week, right? You're going to pick like, what's my low-hanging fruit? What's my first time to value? The other ones, the other bullets, ensuring alignment, opportunity, I kind of went through that in the last slide, so I won't like belabor that point. But a really strong handoff sets up a strong kickoff. Strong handoffs and strong kickoffs position you really well for training. Now training is a bit of like it's a little bit of a polarizing one. Like some people love it, some customers hate it. But however you decide to administer it, be targeted in it. So some of you might do one-on-one training, some of you have webinars, some of you have a certification program, some of you might have like an online university. A million different options. But whatever it should be targeted, it should be incisive, and it should be appropriate, right? It's like share of wallet, there's like share of mind, right? They're doing a day job. They're showing up to your training. So if you've got their attention for 37 minutes in a 1-hour training, because the other 23 minutes they're looking at their phone, that 37 minutes has to count. So what are you going to talk to them in that, if you've got 37 minutes, what's in that 37 minutes, right? The training then will move you into the implementation and deployment. So just thinking, I think, specifically about your strategy around that. What have you learned through handoff, kickoff, and the training that gives you a sense of how do I deploy this thing? Is it like a phased approach? Do I soft launch it? Do we go big bang? Are they coming from a competitor? Do I need to kind of create some of that overlap? Thinking really thoughtfully about like, this user is going to log into your system on a Monday when the official go live happens for the first time. And I always say, you've got one chance at adoption. Because the likelihood they actually log in for the first time is probably decent. But if they haven't been trained, if you haven't set up the right things for them, if you don't have the right path to value, they're gonna log in, they're gonna get bored, and they're gonna bugger off. And then it's 3 times as hard to get them to log back in again. So just be really mindful about how you implement, how you deploy. Do you want to deploy with a beta group? Et cetera, right? So this next one is actually kind of where the rubber meets the road, right? So this is where you're going to think about how you evaluate the effectiveness of your onboarding motion, and through that quantitative discipline of evaluation, and I use the word quantitative on purpose, through the quantitative evaluation of your discipline, you are going to harden the line between your onboarding activities and your revenue outcome. Because at the end of the day, all of this is a cost center. If you talk to your CFO, if you have an onboarding team or a CS team, unless your CSMs are also like owning the entire renewal, most of the time, your onboarding team or the people that do that stuff, they're going to be listed as in the COS bucket, the cost of service bucket. So anytime you want more onboarding managers, anytime you want people that do this, the question is going to be, what's my ROI? If I spend more money here, what do I get? So being data-driven helps you harden that line of attribution. So core metrics at the bottom, I've used a pyramid here. It seems to work. You might see this inverted. Sometimes it's a funnel. Any type of cone-shaped object really does the trick here. But core metrics, the first one is collecting data. So I'm going to use like training, let's say. So core metrics, collect data around how many accounts and users at those accounts are trained, right? Simple. I sold 1,000 accounts this month. How many of those accounts went through training? Base level metric. Level 2, satisfaction. That's NPS scores, smile sheets, things like that. So of the 700 people that took my training, how many of those 700 said it was any good? So I've gone from 1,000 sold, 700 trained, 500 thought it was good. So now I'm at like level 3, so engagement metrics. So how often and what intervals are those folks engaging with the rest of your content? So it's not just like, I don't mean engaging in your platform, I mean how many of them went to the training, looked at some of the extra stuff, did the 102 version, went to your university, did the certification, right? Level 4, this is usage. This is the one that's like, got all the fancy acronyms, right? Provisioned over active, daily active over monthly active, DAO-MAO, weekly active, over monthly active, WAM-out. Like you've got all these fancy acronyms and things like that, right? But really it's usage, right? What you care about is like how many people are actually doing the thing. How many people are logging in, right? Any of those metrics cover that. So I've gone from my 1,000 provisioned, 700 trained, 500 like the training, 300 of the 500, or let's say 400 of the 500 are in the system using it. Awesome. The biggest one, and this is the red one, this is the impact metrics. This is the one that matters. This is the one you're trying to drive, because at the end of the day, your impact metrics is, did they use the product how you taught them? Did they spend less time trying to figure something out, and did they see value? So we, for example, have this concept of key beats. So we do all this analysis that says, okay, so if you're an average customer, what are the key pieces of usage that are the most highly correlated to a positive renewal outcome? So I'll look at, and we did this at scale, so like we might look at 5,000 accounts and we'll say, okay, how many of them did these things in the system, and what was their ultimate renewal outcome? Because then I can delineate what those key beats are, or key pieces of usage are. And then I can have my trainings be orientated around driving those key things. Again, it's not about being perfect all the time, it's about knowing when and where to be perfect. So if I'm gonna have a user do one bloody thing, what is the one thing that is gonna drive adoption and make them want to do more in the system? I don't care about how many of the other random things they do that actually don't drive stickiness. Don't care. And I'm not gonna orchestrate my trainings and my onboardings around that. I'm gonna figure out what are the things that really drive stickiness, and I'm gonna spend a lot of time on that. So that's the impact metrics. And so what you've got is a funnel, and it teaches you where your gaps are, where is there leakage in the funnel, where are things falling through the cracks. Oh, bugger, a lot of people attended my training, but all of them hated it. Okay, we've got to improve the training, right? Maybe you sold a lot of accounts and none of them attended the training. Oh shit, sorry, excuse my friends. This is on the internet forever. But like, maybe I need to make it more available and accessible, right? So where's the slippage? Where's the leakage? It's like a sales funnel. Where am I falling down? So by thinking about it like that, it allows you to understand where's the weakness and be data-driven in your approach for improvement. Finally, onboarding is a process, it's not an event. The whole the one constant is that things will change, right? It's a real thing. So stakeholders change, business use case changes, headcount changes, hiring changes, macroeconomic factors change. We've all seen this, right? So I'm going to use one of those classic higher ed sort of things of the forming, storming, norming, and performing. It is this cycle. But you're doing this all the time because all of these things change. So you've never just onboarded a customer and it's done, because they might grow, they might want to expand, they might shrink, they might want to spend their money elsewhere in the business. So constantly onboarding and re-onboarding. You are always in this motion. It's not just a singular event. And then I will say, so I've got 2 minutes, and then I think Alex is going to play weird music. So it is not simply the date of contract sign versus the date of first login, drawing that line to retention and revenue, right? The example I actually really like to give here is my iPhone. This notion of they signed the contract on Jan 1st, and then they did a thing on Jan 10th. 10 days time to value. That's true. That's time to first value. But it's not the time to the true value, because the true value, the first value is probably just a small sliver of the total, right? My phone. I buy an iPhone. My time to first value, Apple could say, okay, it's when Dominic bought the thing, got it home, opened the box, threw away the instructions, did the thing, and then turned it on and sent a text message. 2 hours time to first value for Dominic on my phone. But is that really why I'm buying this phone? Because my Motorola Razr flip phone circa 2003 could also send text messages. So what is real value for my phone? The real value, and if you're Apple, is probably saying, oh, is Dominic using the sleep tracking feature? And does he have it synced to his iPad and his iWatch? And is he using the heart rate fitness monitor? And does he use Siri? That's true value. And that's what you want to aim for, is saying, oh, they logged in and did a thing, that's fine. But is that going to be the thing that permeates at day 90, day 120, day 180, and into the renewal window? Because if they were only measuring my time to send a text message, there is no stickiness in the iPhone for text message sending, although the whole reply feature is pretty good. So you want to be measuring value for them at each stage. It's not just time to first value, it's how that permeates and pervades through their journey. Oh, wow, look at that, 13 seconds left. So, yeah, I think that's the notion. It's just that thought of be intentional, be deliberate, over-communicate, Be customer-centric, but be consultative. And remember that be quantitative in your analysis, right? Like all of this, honestly, it's a little bit like Moneyball, right? It's not like gut feel. Data will tell you what's happening. Data will tell you if you suck or not. Data will tell you if you're great or not. Be data-driven. That's like probably the biggest thing here. All right, cool. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, guys. Yeah. Do you want me to stand up here?
Yeah, just hang out over here.
All right, cool.
Cool. So this first question is very niche and probably won't resonate with anyone here, but how do you handle when the expectation in the sales cycle is way off from the reality that the customer is expecting?
How do you handle expectations? So yeah, I know, I feel like this is like an existential question. So I think what I found is that, and again, we've heard it yesterday, right, is empathy, right? That's key, right? But you've got to acknowledge it. You have to acknowledge it. I feel like when you try and kind of like pass it off as like, oh, that's not what was actually said, or you must have misunderstood that. That doesn't tend to go down too well with the customer. It's like when you order a hamburger with no avocado and they put avocado on it, and they're like, no, that's what you said. You don't feel good about that. So, sorry, I'm talking about hamburgers. So the point there is, I think, in my mind, when that happens, I like to like kind of front it and say, oh, okay, so like, let me help kind of true that up. Now, if we're in the business of retaining customers, you're probably never in a place of like, well, we'll just release you, we'll just get rid of the contract, right? So you want to see how it can work. So at that moment, I think it's a little, that's where honestly like the CS special sauce comes in. How can I bridge this gap for you? Is it a product gap? How can I try and create some manual process around that to get you where you want to go? Maybe get it on the roadmap, see where that is. If it's like a timing thing, right? You said we were going to be up and running in 5 days. What do you mean it's a 10-week implementation time frame, right? But like, I think you've got to own it, and I think you've got to move into like a solution mode, right? Don't spend time on debating the validity of their expectation. Like, you've got to acknowledge it, right? It's a little bit like couples counseling in that sense, where it's like, acknowledge that feeling, acknowledge how the person feels, and then say, great, I acknowledge this, I'm sorry, I understand that, I'm being empathetic. Okay, how can I close this gap for you? I think that's the best way, honestly. I think trying to kind of like play it off or do something different, it just creates frustration and you lose a lot of credibility.
Awesome. Let's get one more in. So how do you keep your customers engaged during the onboarding process? Actually, let's go with the top one. How should we be requalifying and reconfirming if these aren't clearly defined and expressed during the sales cycle?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that I've tried to do is, and this is always a challenge, but try and get involved as early as you can in the sales cycle, right? AEs are never going to want you like buggering up their close, right? They're not like, I don't want you in the conversation because you're just going to slow this down and you might derail my deal by telling the customer the truth. Sorry, there's no bitterness here. But I think being in early and setting the expectation really early, I think that's why like those first 2 stages that I talked about in the journey, that internal handoff thing, it's so important. Because if you can walk into the kickoff knowing that something has been maybe kind of slightly, some artistic license has been taken, you can be proactive and address it in the kickoff and look like the good guy, right? You can go in and be like, so, all right, so this is how it's been, you can direct the conversation, you own the narrative. The worst is when you walk in and you're like, oh, so I heard that you wanted a hamburger with avocado. And the customer's like, I told the salesperson that avocado sends me into like anaphylactic shock. And then you're like, right then, I knew, and again, you don't own the narrative. The sooner you know, the better you can own the narrative. So the internal handoff is key. Get prepped for the kickoff so that if there is something that is not the delta between expectation and reality, you can go in knowing how you're going to close that gap versus having it happen to you. Because if it's happening to you in the moment, you've got like really limited options of how you can triage and make the moment better. Go in, know what the gap is, and you can immediately start owning the narrative and set the conversation in the right direction.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Dominic.
Thank you. Appreciate that.